to secure it to the goal. So that's the plan. We'll see on Sunday if the plan actually works.
Put together the panels.
I have not as yet, but I'll go over it.
Okay.
Sunday's the day. Let's see.
Okay, so we had started, good morning, everybody. We had started this whole idea of intellectual property. Marv sent us a piece yesterday. I didn't have a chance to read it. Any chidushim as far as Canadian law?
It was actually interesting. So you're mentioning about fair dealing or whatever. There's a
Fair
section-
use, yeah.
Yeah. There's a section in the Canadian Copyright Act that actually parallels pretty much the U.S. version about where there's acceptance for personal use, education, other things.
Yeah, there's a guy named David Nemmer in the US who wrote Nemmer on copyright law. It's very, very famous. A Yid, of course. Yeah. Okay. He's got like several volumes. I know my dad had it on his shelf. Yeah. Okay. So we were learning yesterday that there is such a concept of fair use in halacha as well, that even if the opening, the introduction to the book says, all rights reserved, copying is prohibited, but to excerpt small snippets from it is considered acceptable, especially because you're using it for personal use. So there were really two conditions that we saw. Number one, it needs to be for personal use when you make a copy, and number two, it should be small and excerpted. So therefore, in the issue of, let's say, from the Shevet HaLevi, we saw that a school wants to be able to make a packet of let's say, Judaism 101, and they want to be able to copy from multiple books and make a packet for their students, since it's not being used for resale and it's only for use within the school, that would be acceptable. Okay, and then, and Rav Shlomo Zalman had also said the same thing. He says, Ulam shoneha davar betochnot mechashev sheyesh kotvim beferush, that when it comes to computer programs, software is what I think he's referring to. He says where they write explicitly on the packaging or on when you purchase it, shehem lo mochrim et hatochnot ela rak notnim reshut shimush. They write explicitly in the software, we're not selling you the software, we're selling you a license to use the software. The aser lahatik lo kol safek vafilu chelak mimenu. Then even copying a portion of the software, let's say the software has multiple modules, to copy it would not be permitted. Aval b'shut igros Moshe kosav be'inyan adam shahutzi kaletet b'divrei Torah, the kosef b'ferish oser lahatik mehakaletet shelo. There's a tshuva from Rav Moshe. In Rav Moshe's time, they already had cassette tapes. Okay, that was I think even
The technology.
that was the technology that Moshe passes away in 1986. I don't think they may have just started with CDs in 86. I don't know, but he probably wasn't aware of it yet because it wasn't really for mass use. He writes that a person who produces a cassette of Divrei Torah, okay, he makes a lecture series, but he writes explicitly on the packaging that copying is prohibited. Vadai sha'aser. He says that would be prohibited to make copies of his cassette, kevin sha'asa et zel laharviach kesef, because he's selling his cassette tapes. This is so archaic. It's like a different world, right? Like I was looking through some of my old stuff, and I have this box full of cassette tapes. And I was hoping, like, I think I even bought one of these converters from cassette to cassette to MP3. And I bought the item, but I never got around to doing it. It's too much trouble. And like,
You know, I have
is-
boxes as well.
what is there really in there that
Sometimes it could be good sharing, but
it could be?
like, they don't get dated. But the
Yeah,
problem is, there's just too much effort.
yeah. Anyway, Vadai Sha'asr, Kevin Sha'asa, Etzel Laharviach Kesef, Umela Kevin Shazer Ritzono, Ein Rishut Lakachat Liishtamesh Bali Rishut. So he says, Rav Moshe, that it's clear that because he put this ban on copying because he wants to be able to make money off of this enterprise of selling his lecture series. Again, it's a bygone era. No one makes money off of very, very few people, I should say, make money off of audio Torah, because this is just so much, there's such a proliferation of it. It's so widely available. But back in the 1980s, probably this was, or 70s, this was something that you could sell, and therefore you don't have a right to use these cassettes in any way that you want. And if he doesn't give you express permission, then you are committing an act of theft. I'm not familiar with this sefer. That if the printer, the publisher, says that you may not copy from this book, then you can't even make personal copies, which is well beyond what fair use would say. Dekavin shezeh shelo, lama lo yihi elo koach leser shelo la'acherim, bim kol echad yovo b'yitzalim et hasefer shelo l'miyim kor. He says because the publisher says it's basically my intellectual property, and therefore I can prohibit other people from using it in the way that I see fit. Because if everyone's going to make a copy for themselves, then I'm not going to have anyone to sell it to. And therefore he holds that you're not allowed to make photocopies or to reproduce a tape. So here Rav Sharaga now gives us a huge leniency. Basically, he's giving us a variety of opinions. They're all within the general ballpark of, if a person says all rights reserved, he does have the ability to limit its use. There's a bit of discrepancy among the poskim as far as what fair use is considered. And certainly a person who says, I'm going to rely on Dina de Malchusa to tell me what fair use is, I think would have every right to do so. But he says, now that's an arguable point, because a person could say, how can Dina de Malchusa say that you're not a Goslin? If I tell you that you're not allowed to use it, then I don't care what fair use law says. But I think a lot of poskim would say that halacha aligns with fair use, that it's reasonable for a person, as long as he's not using it for resale, to be able to make copies for himself. Here's an example of when you would be allowed to copy the entire book. Let's say, for example, that a book is out of print. The Adam rotza lilmod bahem ve'ein lo efsharut lahasiget hasefer, and a guy wants to learn from the sefer, and he has no way of acquiring it. Mutar litzalim litzarach limud atzmi. It would be permitted to make a copy of the book for personal use, even if I never bought it, but it's out of print. I have no access to it, and I have every right to learn Torah. So, avolo litzarach mischar, kamosha mavur b'shulchan aruch. But what you would not be allowed to do would be to use it as a business enterprise and to sell that book. As the Shulchan Aruch says, Adam shehifkid sefer Torah etzel chavero, lo yiftach v'yikrabo, that the Shulchan Aruch discusses the following. If someone leaves a Sefer Torah for my for me to watch over, tells me, do me a favor, I'm going out of town, let me leave my Sefer Torah with you. So if that's the objective, is that I'm a shomer over the Sefer Torah, I'm not allowed to open the Sefer or to read from it. Because of Bahaga, v'chein aser lahatik mimenu afilu os echas, nor are you allowed to copy from it even one letter. Now that's, of course, referring to, there was no photocopiers in the times of the Ramah in the 16th century. He's basically saying that you can't open up the Torah. Let's say you want to know how to write a pasuk, you can't copy from the Torah. V'hani mili ba'am haaretz, but that's only with an ignoramus. Aval b'talmud chacham she'en lo sefer kazeh mutter likro lahatik mimenu. But if a person's a Talmud chacham and a guy leaves a sefer with him for safekeeping, the Talmud chacham would be allowed to read from it if this is the only sefer or the only kind of sefer like that he has. Kivadai al das zeh hifchidolo, because certainly we can assume that when the person left it with the Talmud Chacham for safekeeping, it was with the assumption that the Talmud Chacham would watch over it and also use it as a personal enrichment. Uvemakom bittul Torah she'ein svarim nimtzayim yicholim based in lachuf le'echad sheyashel svarav lilmod bahem ad kan devarav. If there's going to be bittul Torah because a particular sefer is not available, then the Beis Din can actually coerce someone to allow others to borrow his svarim. Whereas it goes so far in halacha that so important is the mitzvah of Talmud Torah that if a person has an extensive library and everyone else in the community doesn't have access to svarim, the Beis Din can actually compel this person to lend out his svarim, because we need to make sure that Torah is studied. You can't hoard Torah study. V'lachein bizman sheyesh bittul Torah o hefsed limudim al yedei shabal hazduchiyot lo motzi hasfarim laor. He says, and therefore, if the Torah study is going to be lost because the publisher is refusing to publish the sefer, mutter litzalim ulahatik la'atzmo, then it is permissible to make copies. Now, obviously, this has limitations also. I know because I've published the sefer, my publisher will sometimes sell out and then say, you know what, we're going to republish, but we're going to wait 6 months because we're backlogged.
Yeah.
But it's already in the works that we're gonna do another print. And then another situation is that the Kuzari was reprinted so many times that they said that they wanted to do a completely new typeset. I think it had to do with the fact that it was worn out or something. I don't know how that's possible in the computer age, but that's what they said. So we did, I put in several revisions, small revisions in the footnotes, a word here, a word there, and then they reissued it, but the whole process took close to a year. So a person, if you just read this in a vacuum, it would say, well, if the book's out of print, you can go ahead and reprint the whole book.
Right.
Well, that has limitations also, because there could be a book that's temporarily out of print because the publisher is getting ready to reprint it with some of the revisions. That's not fair for you to say, well, I can't study it, so I have a blanket header to make a copy. No, you have to get in touch with the publisher. So, but the bottom line is let's say klal ha'oleh. So this is really I would say, a superficial review of copyright law.
Yes.
And the reason why it's superficial is because there's so much here. There have been several svarim written on just intellectual property. And so we could spend, weeks and weeks and weeks just on this one. That's a good question. I have one sefer that was written from the Kloisenberger Beis Medrash, a very, very thick sefer on intellectual property. And maybe I'll take a look at it. Klal ha'oila, so the bottom line is, and by the way, a lot of these svarim are not out of print, because even when they're out of print, you get them on Otzer Chachma.
Right.
Like, for example, this Sefer Baruch Omer, which we're studying, I wouldn't even know where to start to purchase it. It may be in print somewhere, but the whole book industry has vastly changed.
How did you pick this in the first place?
I have Otzer Chachma.
I know, but it's such a random. There's 40,000 sworn on Otzer Chachma in big.
It just appealed to me. I was,
Pictures?
yeah.
All on the cover,
It's
right?
the cover.
Don't some of these things become public domain after?
Some of them, well, if the author is no longer alive and his estate is no longer extant, like the Rambam, for example, those things do become public domain, but not new publications. Like the Frankel Rambam is a very famous, relatively new publication that within the last 50 years, it's been published. Why is it subject to copyright? Because they did a whole scholarly review of all of the texts that the manuscripts and the of the Rambam's own writing, and with footnotes and annotations, and that's still subject to copyright. But the original raw text is not subject to copyright, which is why you can go to Sefaria and just download a whole bunch of texts. Yeah.
How about libraries? Where does that come in? I mean, does the author, does the publisher have to agree that something go into a library that can be lent out and then?
No, a publisher doesn't have to agree. Any book, I mean, I think that's common law.
Right.
Anything that's printed, that's put into print, it's understood that could be purchased by a library. Yeah.
And then
the library, well, yes, it does, obviously, right? But a library lends books out. A person would not be allowed to take a library book and just photocopy it, unless, according to Reb Shraga, if it's a Torah book and it's out of print.
Who would be responsible for the copying if you borrowed the book from the library?
The person who copied it.
Well, the person who copied it is the Goslin. The library is not the Goslin.
The library.
Yeah, yeah. So Klal Ha'ola. So this is what emerges. He gives us 5 bottom lines. Number 1, Adam shehitfis sefer v'shir la'atzmo hazuchliyot. If a person publishes a sefer and he says all rights reserves, he maintains the rights. Kol hazuchliyot shmurot lo ve'in reshut l'shum adam lahadfis l'lo reshus. Then he does have a right to withhold rights, and no person has a right to print that sefer without permission. And by the way, whenever I've done this, whenever I've made excerpted significant portions from a sefer, I always send an email to the publisher asking them for permission. And you'd be surprised. There are some times where the publisher limits, like, I'll give you an example. In this issue of Chachmei Lev, we have an author who had published an article 12 years ago in a different journal. And he said, please use this article. But I said, well, I have to get permission from the original journal. It was in the Chakira journal, and he asked us to publish it in the Chachmei Lev. So I sent an email to the Chakira editors, and I asked them for permission to publish it. And they said, provided that you say, first published in the Chakira Journal 2012, and then you have our permission. Yeah. So, that's really, it's not just an act of courtesy, it's halacha, because otherwise we would have been guilty of stealing from the Chakira Journal, because it's their intellectual property. It's,
even if you would have quoted their name, like you said,
yeah, even if we would have quoted their name, we still have to get permission. We still have to get their permission, because they participated in the production of that intellectual property. In other words, we got permission from the author, but they were involved in the editing process. They were involved in putting it together. I mean, we basically retypeset it, but that's all we did. But everything else was done through they were a channel to get this intellectual property out. So we did feel a responsibility to ask them permission. Yeah.
So what liability would you have if you didn't get permission and no complaint?
Well, first of all, you could be sued in secular court. And these things happen all the time. Like I gave you the example, I don't know if you were here, but when I published the Kuzari, I published with, this is back in the 90s, I published with one publisher, and that publisher, which was a publisher of Jewish books, sold their entire catalog to a larger print-on-demand publisher called Roman and Littlefield, which is a well-known publishing house. And they bought this small Judaica publishing company, and they figured that they would use that, add to their catalog. So before the sale was finalized, they sent a letter to each one of their authors, basically saying that if you'd like to withhold, you have a one-time opportunity to take back your intellectual property before the sale. That was what was negotiated. You can take back your property, and then you can do with it as you wish, and it will not be included in the sale. So I wasn't happy with the way that the publisher was distributing the work. It wasn't getting out enough. And so I, in consultation with my father of blessed memory, I held back the rights to the book. And I figured I'll try my luck, and I'll try to sell it. I'll try to peddle it to a more traditional Judaica publisher. So I did, and I peddled it to Art Scroll first, and which is an interesting story unto itself. Art Scroll expressed interest, but they eventually turned it down, not because of Daniel Karapkin, but rather because they felt that the Kuzari was too controversial for their publishing house, because it quoted too much philosophy, Aristotelian philosophy, which is why the Art Scroll publishing house will never publish Kuzari and will never publish the Moreh Nevuchim unless they change their ideological position, which Feldheim said, we will take it, which is an interesting distinction between the two publishing houses. The irony is that Art Scroll will censor the Rishonim, as you can see. They will basically say, we don't feel we want this to get into our readership's hands, which is a very important thing to be aware of, that Judaism today is not what Judaism was 1,000 years ago. Even the idea, I'm not going to go so far as call it censorship, but even the withholding of literature that was mainstream Jewish literature 1,000 years ago is being withheld from the public because we're not sure if you can handle it. And that, I think that's a bit unsettling. But anyway, it is what it is. It is what it is. But then I peddled it to Feldheim, and they took it. Well, anyway, a few months later, I discover that this big publisher, Roman and Littlefield, has published a few hundred copies of the book. What's going on? We withheld it from the sale. So it was a mistake. But guess what? You can't say, if you fail to pay your taxes, you can't say, sorry, it was a mistake. You got to pay for it. So we sued him, and we got a lot of money. So
in Canada, the remedies for that sort of thing would be, under the Copyright Act, you get statutory damages, which is prescribed, and then you get compensatory damages if you lost profit or whatever it is, and you can get an injunction from the court to prevent them from republishing or publishing.
Yeah.
Say stop, right?
Right.
Yeah.
How do you know they stopped and they didn't know to do it again? They're just smart.
Well, we went to court, and the court made them pay a lot more than they could have possibly made in profits. So, that's how you disincentivize someone from stealing your intellectual property. Yeah. So I made a few $1,000, because of their goof. Okay. Anyway, so you sue them. That's what you do. You can either sue in Beis Din, or you can sue, if it's a secular non-Jewish publisher, you can sue in secular court. Okay, number 2. V'hu adin lekalatot shel divrei Torah o shira v'zimra she'asur lahatikan afilu l'tzarach atzma. For recordings of divrei Torah or songs, Rav Sharaga paskins that you cannot copy them even for personal use. I disagree. with this particular psak. Personal use to make copies of a recording, it's clear that that's permitted, especially nowadays. If I pay for a recording on iTunes, let's say, or on some Jewish, what is it, Eminem? Is that the name of the,
It's a rapper.
No, there's
Out of the box.
there's a it's not Eminem, it's MM or something like that. There's a music publisher out in New York that they have their own website, and you can buy albums from them and download the albums. So those you can put on multiple devices. It's like this is dated, this tshuva, because he's not up with contemporary law and the newest technology. So 3, ach im rotza lahatik daf misefer o chelek mishir letzorech atzmi mutar. If you want to make a copy of, let's say, one page from a book or a portion of a song for personal use, that's permissible. Keven she'ein derech lahakpid ela im kein amr beferish afilu chelek mimenu. Unless the author states explicitly that I am makpid, that you shouldn't even copy an excerpt from this book. And that's also against the fair use law. Fair use law would allow you to take excerpts. So again, he's being more machmir than a lot of the poskim. 4, aval tochnot mechashev shekasuv shemochrim rak zuchut shimush. He says when you purchase software and it says explicitly that this is not being sold but rather licensed, asur lahatik mehem bichlal va'afilu chelek mimenu. Then you can't even for personal use make a copy even from a portion of the software. Va'afilu adam sherachash mechevra tochna shlema bekesef mole v'hu mishtamesh b'misrad. He says even if a person acquires from a company a full software product, v'hu mishtamesh b'misrad v'rotz lahatik mimenu letzarach hamechashev babayit asur. Even making a copy of the software for personal use in your home, even when you purchase the software, the license for the software, that you're not allowed to do either. And again, this is very controversial. If I purchase a copy of a software and I have 2 computers, one in my office and one at home, I think a number of poskim, and I think this is part of fair use law, that you are allowed to make multiple, you're allowed to install it on your machines, one at home and one at.
Now what they do is they give you a code to put in with the download, and you're only allowed to use that code once. So once you've used it, it gets recorded. If you try and put it on a second machine.
Right.
So
Because
they're
another
saying, no,
person
you
could,
can't.
Yeah.
another person could be using
Well,
it.
Because another
Anybody
person
could use
could be using it,
You
right?
might say I've got two computers at home, and that's why one.
What?
Eminem, mostly.
Mostly music. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
Dr. Google.
That's true. When they have a license like that, that's true. But let's say I purchased the Bar Ilan CD recently, and I also upgraded my Otzer Chachma recently. So the Otzer Chachma, it's a hard drive. It's an external hard drive that you hook up to your computer. So there's no way for you to use it, but you can just schlep the hard drive to various different computers. That's not a problem. With the Bar Ilan, they used to offer it on a flash drive. Okay, so you could schlep the flash drive from one system to another. Now, for an extra $100, I don't know why, you can download the entire system onto your internal hard drive. So it just saves you that hassle of having to schlep the thing and stick it in. So I said to them, well, what if I get a new laptop? So they said, well, of course, we'll let you reinstall it. You know, you just have to contact us and we'll let you reinstall it. Because it's understood, you know, people, you know, just because I replaced the hardware, I paid a hefty amount for this product.
Is that, but like, how long does that payment last for? Is it yearly purchase.
No, it's a permanent purchase.
Yes, until they update, until the next update of the.
But then you have to pay for that.
No, but you're not obligated to upgrade.
No, I
The
understand.
the upgrade is just that they add additional svarim, additional features.
Right.
Okay.
So how often is this upgrade? Once a year?
I think they upgrade it. They try to do it about once a year, once every 2 years.
There's thousands of farm every time you upgrade new stuff.
With the Bar Ilan, it's not thousands. So I only upgrade like once every 5 years. And
Who
with
would
the
decide?
Otzer Chachma, I think I've upgraded now twice in the last 10 years also. It's quite expensive, like it's in the hundreds of dollars. So in other words, you have to think before you upgrade. It's not like us, but finally, Avalim Ozlu Sifrei HaKodesh Ubali Esuchliat Lo Matfisim. If the sefer is out of print and they're not planning to reprint, you notice that he says he adds that Mutzer Letzalem Ulahatik Litzarach Atzmo. Then for personal use, you can make a copy of it. And I think we're gonna maybe look a little bit further. Rav Sharaga has an additional tshuva on this, where he expands on this idea. I'll try to see if I have it on my Otzar HaChachma. So let's hold it for today because we're over time.